Welcome to Exit Algorithms, the podcast where we decode what it really takes to unlock growth, streamline operations, and prepare your business for a high-value exit. I'm your host, Pete Vera, and today I'm just absolutely graced by the presence of Lenny Feinstein. He's a serial entrepreneur who's built, scaled, and exited multiple eight-figure businesses across different industries. He grew a commercial cleaning company to 30 million in revenue before selling to private equity in 2018, and also has a property management portfolio that he exited 3 years later. So I'm sure we'll get into all of that here shortly. Lenny, thanks for coming on the show.
Uh, Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Always love to give back and help where I can. And of course, I know you from the community, Dealmaker Wealth Society, which is a great community where we all network on a regular basis. So always happy to help out my fellow protege and anybody else who might need it. So yeah, my stage, I'm a little bit older than a lot of people that are in our group, certainly, and maybe not as older than some people that'll be viewing this podcast. But you reach my age, I'm 64. You want to give back. It's not all about making; it's about giving. So one of the things I love to do in Dealmaker Wealth Society, as well as just with others as well, is to give back. Right? Hopefully. Prevent people from paying the same dumb tax that I paid many times. So, and countless times when you run a small business, there's always going to be challenges. And so if I can help in any way, shape, or form, I always feel great about that. That's the best reward in the world when you know you're helping other people and you're giving. So yeah, the pleasure is mine, and absolutely, humbled that I could be on your podcast for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to learning about, you're the perfect candidate. You have tons of experience in M&A, um, and just business in general. How about for guests that haven't heard of you before, can you share your background and how you got started in business and what led you to what you do today to keep going too?
Yeah, my wife always gets angry with me when I say this, but I started out prior to me starting out in my own business. um, I was messed up. Um, I was, a juvenile delinquent. I left my hometown when I was 18, backpacked all across the country, hitchhiked and backpacked, and I think it was being on the road that got me to believe in myself, to have confidence in myself. Didn't know that that would translate to business, but when you're on the road, this was 1979 when I started backpacking across the country. When you're on the road, kind of a lot of dumb tax too, right? You
Mhm.
get picked up by the wrong people. You have incidents and situations, and I survived them, and it kind of changed my perspective. At least for a while. When I got tired of the road after 6 months, my parents had moved from New Jersey to Florida. Went to Florida, ended up going to Florida State University for a couple of years, and I kind of fell back in my old ways. Partying too much, just getting into trouble. Nothing bad trouble, like I wasn't a serial killer, but just stupid stuff, stupid, uh, young and dumb stuff, right? Um, when I finally got kicked out of Florida State University, my father put me in Florida Atlantic University in Boca, which was a commuter school at the time, with the proviso that hopefully I wouldn't get in trouble. So,
Mm.
which was true because there was like nothing to do there. So most students were gone over the weekends. I was alone in the dorms. So I started to focus on my life and really get serious about school and so on and so forth. And when I was up in Tallahassee, I needed a job because I blew a bunch of my father's money. And I was working cleaning in the state capitol in Tallahassee. And so when I started to get serious in Boca Raton, where Florida Atlantic University is, I had a professor in my I think my senior year of college business school,
Mm.
and we had to do a business plan. Back in those days, there was no decks. It was a good old business plan. So he suggested that we use something that we had some knowledge of. So I had some knowledge cleaning the state capitol up in Tallahassee. So I went ahead and I started putting together this business plan. One of the things that we had to do in the business plan, Pete, was we had to go to different establishments that would utilize a cleaning service. At that time, my father took my car away, so I had a moped, and I would zoom around Boca Raton, popping in office buildings and things like that. What don't you like about your cleaning company? All the stuff the professor told us to do.
Mm.
And I was shocked, like everybody was unhappy with their cleaning company. So after I did my business plan, which I got an A on, by the way, so I was turning my life around, I was like, well, wait a second here. I have a business plan. Nobody likes their cleaning company. Why don't I start a cleaning company? Problem is, my father had just filed for bankruptcy on a franchise that he had bought, that the franchisor went out of business. He had no money, and I had no money. So I put together $100, started my cleaning company in 1984, right as I was graduating college. Had some job offers that my parents were unhappy I didn't take because, these were corporate jobs and they felt like I had just gotten my degree. One was Pfizer Pharmaceutical and another one was Xerox. And so I said, well, look, give me a shot. Let me see if I can get this cleaning company, off the ground. And if not, I could always go back and use my degree and get a job. So that's what I did. Because I had no money, I washed windows and did maid service during the day because I got paid on the spot. So the cash conversion cycle was great. And then at
Nice.
night, we started to, put together proposals to clean buildings, which we did, offices as well. Still only had my moped, so I had it retrofitted with these big baskets on the back that I could put my mop and bucket, and I used to put my vacuum in it, and I would bungee strap my mop bucket to the moped, and I would be zipping through Boca Raton, cleaning offices at night and washing windows during the day. And from that,
Wow.
we grew, right? It was a good time. Then we got hit with a savings and loan crisis a few years later, about 5 years later, which really hurt Boca Raton in South Florida. So a lot of the offices I was cleaning, a lot of the office buildings went into bankruptcy or foreclosure. So I had to look for another niche. And it just so happened my father was selling video poker machines, non-gambling, to restaurants and hotels. And I went out with him one day just to be with him, really. And I started to look around and I was like, wow, a lot of these restaurants are dirty. So I started asking the owners and the general managers, do you need your restaurant cleaned? And finally, one hotel, a Holiday Inn Plantation, said, yeah, you can clean our kitchens. Just give us a reasonable
Mm.
proposal. And the question that the owner of the hotel, David Katz, I'll never forget it. We ended up having to sue him, but that's another story. He said, well, do you know how to clean kitchens? And I lied, but I didn't lie. I lied because I didn't know how to clean commercial kitchens, but I did know how to clean a kitchen. I had an apartment, right? So
Sure.
I did lie, but it wasn't a full-blown lie. And then when I got the contract, I was like, oh my God, how do I clean a kitchen? So what did I do? I went to my janitorial supplier. I asked them, I said, listen, I'll buy all my equipment for you to clean this kitchen, but you need to send somebody over that knows what they're doing. Remember, this is third shift cleaning.
Mm.
So it wasn't easy for them to find somebody, but they did. And they came and they showed us how to clean equipment, what they call a hotline in a restaurant. And that was the beginning of my niche, cleaning restaurants and hotels and country clubs. So if you know South Florida, there's tons of country clubs and restaurants and hotels. So that was in the 1990s. Um, Built it from there. When I reached my level, I brought on two partners that I felt were value added to what I needed to grow the company further. And so they bought into the company in 1996. And when they bought in, we were doing less than a million. Within 5 years, with the three of us, we were probably doing 5 million. Within 10 years, we were doing 12 million. And when we sold, our revenues were 30 million, and we were in 30 states doing over 1,000 restaurants a night, 7 nights a week. So, but it was a village that got us there, right? It wasn't just me. I was the CEO, especially towards the end. I was co-CEO for many, many years. And then my partners were 10 years older. So, the last 5 years of the business where we grew from 12 million to 30 million, I was the sole CEO and, had a great team around me, great CFO, great COO. My COO, Bob DeMaio, is actually runs our division within the private equity group to this day. So,
Mm.
yeah, it was just a journey that started very humbly and brought on some good partners and a really good C-suite when we could afford to, and a great village of middle managers. Yeah, so I think we sold more best in class because we had those infrastructures that private equity is looking for. So hopefully that gives you a
Gotcha.
good overview.
Yeah, great overview. Thank you. Such an inspiring story. It actually reminds me of Rockefeller a little bit, where you just accept the work before you necessarily have the infrastructure, and then you just work your ass off to figure out how to get it done, right?
Yeah, there's a funny story around that. My wife was, I think, pregnant with my second um, child. And so my daughter was probably about 3 or 4. And at the time, I had brought on my partners, but we were living on $500 a week, each of the partners. Um, and it was tight, right? Even though it was the 1990s, 500 a week was tight. And I was working my ass off, so were my partners. And we took on a huge chunk of business. And I was so excited. I went home. I told my wife, we celebrated. She was like, we're going to make more money. We're not going to have to sweat things out. Both my kids were colic. So they had to have special
Mm.
formula, diapers. Anybody who has kids knows the drill. So within a couple months, I come back with my paycheck, and my wife's like, "Why is the paycheck 450, not five?" And I'm like,
Mm.
"Well, what I didn't realize, honey, sheepishly, is that when you grow like that, you either have to put money in the business or take a pay cut to support the new growth." So,
Mm.
yeah, we were taking on work sometimes without even the infrastructure, and we were often taking on work where we didn't have the working capital to support the new growth. So we often had to put money in and take a pay cut so that because we were growing. So that was kind of
Mm.
a wake up call. And I'm a coach right now to other small businesses. And that's one of the things that I advise them on, that when you get a business, presumably the business is going to have a degree of working capital that you're given when you close. But I always tell them, remember, that's the working capital, what's called normalized working capital. Our net working capital. That's the working capital that was figured on the business at the time that you bought it. But if you're going to double the size of that business, your working capital needs most likely are going to be double or more, because
Mm.
in order for you to double the business, you're going to need more money than probably the previous seller had in working capital. And then plus you're going to need that working capital to pay your bills as you're growing. So, I always use that lesson that I went through. Did not have a happy wife when I came home a couple months later. She was thinking we are going to make 600 or 700 a week, and now we're only making four. I think it was 400. I think we all took a
Mm.
100 a week pay cut. So I was making less money, but the business was growing because one of the reasons why, another thing I coach about all the time, is that when you start your business undercapitalized, you often are feeling the effects of that through the years,
Mm.
versus if you stick, a couple hundred grand in the business to start it. If I had the money, it would have been probably a lot easier, and I probably could have grown a lot quicker.
Got it. Yeah. Um, Very cool. Makes sense. You got to watch cash flow. So number one uh, thing, right? I was curious
Absolutely.
about your growth during that time as a leader and manager, and the changing roles from the day you started to eventually exiting. How that process was for you.
Yeah, great question. In the beginning, we all did it all. In the morning, all three partners went out, checked accounts, corrected escalations. In the afternoon, we all sold. Um, Luckily, I had two other partners that could do everything. And of course, I had to do everything before they came aboard. Um, Although we did have little side specialties, like one of my partners, Jerry, he he had his MBA in finance, so he was essentially overseeing the books. I had my degree in marketing, so I took on more of a marketing role. And my third partner, Bob, was a vice president of a cleaning company in New York City that actually cleaned a bunch of Trump properties, and he had a lot of operational chops. So we all had some sub chops, but we
Hmm.
also did everything in the beginning. As the business started to grow and we added, full charge bookkeepers and controllers and, directors, not really a director of operations in the beginning, but, area managers and things like that, then our roles changed a little bit. I segued more into the marketing area of the business.
Hmm.
As Bob was more into the full-time operations and Jerry, overseeing finance. So that morphed and changed, and it constantly changed. I always tell this to people in business. Things are going to change all the time, right? Like I said, the last maybe, I think it was more than 5 years, probably the last 6 to 8 years, my partners were already in their late 60s or 70s. So they had very limited roles, and I became the overall CEO of the company, having
Hmm.
to make sure that every department was functioning properly and we were growing. And it took us a couple of years to sell our business because we made some major mistakes. And we had to go through one broker and two investment bankers before we finally, reached a point where we could, sell the business. So it was a lot on
Yeah.
my plate because they weren't really involved as much. And I had to not only make sure that the business was sellable, but also that we were humming and growing, because private equity
Hmm.
doesn't want to buy a company that's not growing. So, yeah, it was different. You definitely morph into different positions as the company grows.
Makes sense. Yeah, as the company grows, you have to grow.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. And yeah, I'd love to dive in a little further on some of the maybe the lessons learned through the sale process, and what private equity is looking for in a company.
Yeah, so we're the example of not what to do. We hired the wrong brokers, the wrong investment bankers. Our business was not ready financially in terms of reporting. Like we're all in the world of Main Street businesses, right? So where it's mostly SBA 7A. But when you get into the private equity world and you're dealing with senior loan providers and potentially mezzanine or subordinate loan providers, there is different requirements in terms of how your books look, right? So, if you want to sell best in class and get the best multiple, you probably want what's called audited or reviewed financials.
Hmm.
We didn't have either. We ultimately, with our third investment banker, he convinced us to get what's known as reviewed financials, which are kind of a level below an audited financial. Not as good, but better than just a bunch of QuickBook reports. So I think it's very, very important to make sure that you are ready in terms of what private equity looks for when they're buying a business. A lot of the stuff that Carl teaches, transfer of value, making sure that it isn't, the whole business just doesn't sit right up here. That you have
Yeah.
middle managers, you have a C-suite. If you're going to sell to private equity, they probably want to see that you have some semblance of a C-suite. You want to have good SOPs, so also like what Carl teaches us, standard operating procedures, good, you know, uh, a good, what's the word I'm thinking of? Good policies and positive, feedback from employees, good
Hmm.
policies for your customers. We had something that I developed called the 8 C's of Immaculate. That was our company, which eventually became the 12 C's, and they were our core values, right? So
Hmm.
control quality was one of them. Communication was another. We had a rule that you had to get back to a customer within 24 hours. We had a rule that you had to, we had one of our C's was called complaint resolution. You had to resolve a complaint within 24 to 48 hours, depending on the severity of the complaint. And you then had to follow up with the customer who originated the complaint.
Hmm.
So we had these core values that we ran our business around, and that was attractive to private equity, as well as standard operating procedures, clean financials, reviewed clean financials, and then a C-suite of some sort. We had a pretty good C-suite actually. We had a great CFO, a good buddy of mine to this day, Bill. We had a good COO, like I told you, that is still running the
Nice.
company. We had a kind of a CMO, but I was more the CMO and CEO. We had a chief technology officer. So we had a C-suite, and that's important for private equity. Not so much for Main Street, but for private equity. Um,
Hmm.
and then, listen, we made a lot of mistakes. If I knew what I knew now, if I knew all about what Carl and Chris and Ross teach about, understanding the M&A process, I would always tell people, if you're selling a business and you've never been involved in the M&A process, take a couple courses about it. Learn about, what creates best in class when you're going to sell. What are the things you need to do that's going to get you the best multiple? We didn't know a lot of that. Luckily, we were a pretty well-run company, so we were able to sell maybe on the higher side of the multiple at the time. But I think owners do a great job, sellers do a great job building their business, right? And then they forget that you have to learn what the mergers and acquisitions process is, or you're going to potentially either lose out on money or do what we did, which was almost a probably closer to a 3-year process to sell our
Hmm.
business, which we should have sold in 6 months. And I wrote an article about this whole process in Acquisitions Aficionado, about like
Okay.
our 3-year Odyssey to sell our business. So yeah, you really have to put the effort into learning how to sell a business.
Right. Yeah, it takes more than a day to to learn all the nuances and even the some of the terminology and stuff a lot of business owners aren't familiar with.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love what you said some things that are really good to know for business owners in terms of making their business more valuable. It's not just, revenue or EBITDA. You hit on a lot of good things besides profits.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Sure.
Is as far as preparation goes, how long would you recommend sellers kind of take their to make their business actually ready for a sale?
Yeah, I didn't think about this until I got involved in M&A and Carl's world, and I have my own private equity group right now. Um, Almost from the very beginning, I think you prepare to sell. Um, but I know that's kind of like a buzzword that you're hearing more and more out there. Sometimes that's not real world, right? Because, obviously you buy a business, you have to, integrate it. You have your 90-day plan. You have to absorb, all the information. You have to handle the HR component of buying a business. You have to figure out, how am I going to ultimately scale the business? But I think your best practices, which are important in selling a business, really start from day one. If you're
Hmm.
buying a company and there's no SOPs, for example, that's something after your 90 or 100-day plan that you should start doing, right? And then I think really if you're going to ramp up to sell and your business is running pretty well and your books are pretty well, they don't have to be audited or reviewed. But I think a year before you really want to sell, you should start preparing, making sure that your financials are as clean as possible. Maybe even get them reviewed. That's not that expensive. Um, we did sort of a quasi Q of E before we even sold.
Hmm.
Our banker did a Q of E with us so that we could really understand what was the valuation of the business. Um, Make sure that your HR is buttoned up. If it's a bigger company, and one of the things about private equity is that they um, they'll buy a business where maybe the financials are lagging a little bit because they know they'll be able to build that back up, but they won't buy a business where the risk profile is too high for them. So make sure that your HR is in order. Make sure your insurances are in order. If you have lawsuits, get them settled, or have a roadmap on how they'll be settled. Make sure that for example, one of the ways we were able to expand into 30 cities was we subcontracted out our cleaning. We
Mm.
had our own managers. We probably had about 50 employees, but they didn't do the actual cleaning. The actual cleaning was done by subcontractors. And we learned the hard way with a couple labor cases that we had to make sure that we were buttoned up with our subcontractors, that our subs were compliant with IRS rules, with labor rules, what they call wage and hourly. So what I did when we had our first labor case in 2012 is I created a department within our company called the Vendor Compliance Department. We called it the VCD. And this vendor compliance department consisted of, at any given time, 3 to 4 girls. One girl sourced vendors for our cleaning job. Another girl made sure they were compliant with their workers' comp, their insurance, all the guidelines that are set forth again by the IRS and the Labor Department. And the third girl handled, complaint resolution and escalations that would occur with subcontractors. And one of the reasons why I put that position in play was, subcontractors, you don't want them going to court because then they could say they work directly for you. So we had this three-tiered approach to handling our vendors. One sourced, one made sure they were compliant, and the other one handled escalations that naturally occur in our industry, cleaning restaurants 7 nights a week, 363 days a year in many
Mm.
areas. So we had to institute those types of policies. But that is what private equity is looking at. If you got a business doing the same amount of revenue that we were doing in the same EBITDA margins, which were about 15%, you don't want you don't want your business to have too much risk, right? Because with those kinds of numbers, PE is very interested, but then if they go look underneath the hood and they see that you have no policies in place for HR or subcontractors or you name it, then you're going to be less attractive to them, even to the point where they'll buy a business that's less profitable than you, but has better structure in the risk profile. So private equity is probably the best risk assessors behind banks and insurance companies. So
Mm.
they're very good at assessing what is the risk, and they have to be because they raise money through limited partners. And if a business, blows up because, there's some, type of risk that they didn't know about, they're stewards of the limited partners' money. So they've got to be very careful on the risk profile side of things.
Got it. Yeah. Oh, that's super helpful. Um, yeah, speaking of investing, I know you have also a lot of real estate assets. I was curious how your investment ideas and process differs between businesses and real estate, and how are they similar?
Yeah, so to be candid, I'm not investing in real estate anymore. I
Mm.
sold my biggest asset, which was 512 apartments, comprised of 2 apartment communities in Tampa. And we sold in 2021. We had a property management company, and we also bought the 2 buildings. One was 300 units, the other was 212. And luckily, we were able to exit that business before interest rates went up. Currently, I'm actually trying to get rid of all my real estate. I
Mm.
currently own 4 mobile home parks and single family homes. Um, there's various reasons, which I don't have to bore the viewers in this podcast, but I'm more interested in investing in businesses now, my group. And there's several reasons, but just for the high level for that is that, when you're dealing with residential real estate, and I don't care what it is, whether it's a mobile home park or it's an apartment community, the courts tend to give more leeway to the tenant than they do the landlord. Um, and in
Mm,
business, it's presumed that if you're in business and I get into a dispute with you and you're in business, the courts kind of put us at equal footing in terms of how they're not how they're going to rule, because they're going to rule on the facts, hopefully, but they're not going to say, well, I'm the landlord, you're the tenant, and so I have something over you, which usually isn't the case. It's usually the tenant that has something over the landlord. But so I don't really look to invest anymore in real estate. I am involved in some, you know, crowd sharing and things like that, but very small. I'm more interested in investing in businesses where, there's usually a larger economies of scale. And if I
mm,
invest in an apartment community, I can probably only afford at best maybe a $50,000 property manager. But if I buy a business that's scaling, I could potentially have a GM or even a CEO that's making 100, 150, 200. And at that level, not always, but at that level, there's I think, a higher probability that you can get a manager that is competent, right?
mm,
So, for example, I have mobile home parks right now, and people are paying lot rent at 450 a month. It doesn't give you a lot of revenue or OpEx to be able to pay somebody a lot of money to manage that park. So then, you're dealing with a lot of the issues that they should be dealing with. And at my age, I'm done with that. So I'm actually
mm.
divesting all my real estate. So it's probably not a great question for me. But to answer it directly, I think I underwrite businesses very similar to the way I would underwrite real estate, right? Real estate, they call it NOI, net operating income. We call it EBITDA. Um, it's essentially the same because a multiple is attached to it. In businesses, it's a multiple times that amount. In real estate, it's an NOI divided by a cap rate. Um, so but it's the same thing essentially, very similar. Um, you want your NOI to be as big as possible so that you can get the best cap rate, depending upon the asset class you're in and the level of that asset class. Is it an A property, a B property? Um, Business, you're trying to get your EBITDA as high as possible so that you can presumably get a strong multiple as long as the transfer of value is there. So
Sure.
very similar in the way you underwrite a deal, except that the names are different and the formulas are a little bit different. But it's the same concept, right? If I have an apartment community, I want to raise rents, I want to reduce vacancies, which is going to translate, cut costs if I can, which is going to translate into my net operating income being as large as I can make it. And in business, kind of the same thing, except you're growing the top line, trying to reduce expenses where you can, and then, increasing your EBITDA. So it's very similar in terms of the way, at least the way I look at it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I've met a lot of people that are transitioning from real estate investing to business investing. So yeah, curious. It makes sense. Probably a lot of your skills that you acquired during real estate investing apply to businesses. Makes perfect
Absolutely.
sense.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know you have. It seems like you've always had partners along for the ride when you scale uh, businesses, right? Like your initial business, you took on two partners, right?
Yes. Yes.
I was curious how
Absolutely.
you find the right partner.
Yeah, so in the cleaning company, I had went to a cleaning conference and I met a gentleman who, funny enough, was in mergers and acquisitions. And he had worked for a very, very large cleaning company called American Building Maintenance. And he was semi-retired. He was part of their M&A department. He headed up their M&A department. And he was sort of doing it on the side now because he was in his 70s. And so we had coffee together at one of the conferences, and I told him that I was burning out and reaching a point where I needed to either sell the business or bring somebody on, but I preferred to bring somebody on. He goes, all right, look, send me some information and I'll keep an eye out. And about 3 months later, he called me up and he said, I got a gentleman who is in California, and there had just been an earthquake, and he wanted to move from California. And his best friend was running that cleaning company that cleaned a bunch of Donald Trump's properties in New
Mm.
York. And the two of them had agreed he was leaving that company because they had promised him equity, never gave it to him. And so he was leaving that company. Jerry, my other partner, was moving from California because the ceiling fell in during an earthquake while they were sleeping. And he was like,
Oh,
I'm getting the hell out of here. And this gentleman from ABM, who was M&A for ABM, was now kind of semi-retired. He connected us, ended up having lunch or dinner, I think dinner, with one of the guys, the guy from California. And then over the series of the next 60 to 90 days, we met frequently, developed a rapport like Carl teaches us, and
mm.
from there we worked out a partnership agreement. Real estate was a little bit different. I've had all different kinds of partners, just depends on my biggest project, the one we sold in Tampa. Um, One of my best buddies, our families are very close. His daughter and my daughter both have three kids. They're very close. He had been connected with a gentleman that had purchased a lot of apartment communities, and they were looking to buy a couple of these properties in Tampa. I had just sold the business in 18, so I had some capital to deploy. And so we all went in as partners, created a property management company, as well as bought the apartment communities, managed a couple other communities in the area. And so, yeah, that was just sort of a timing situation where I came across the gentleman, our third partner, and it was through a buddy of mine that were really good friends.
Gotcha. Yeah, okay. So long-standing kind of it takes a while to build a relationship where you can partner with them and work with them for years.
Yep, yep,
Uh,
yep, yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
I was curious about that. And one of the main focuses of this show is technology and AI. I'm curious how your use of technology or ideas around it have changed over the years.
Yeah, great question. One of the things I feel has always been a superpower of mine is to be open to change. Um, because when I started my business in 1984, there were no cell phones. I don't even think there were pagers. So everything was a landline. So then think about that, right? So then in the 1990s was pagers, and then mid to late 90s you started to see cell phones. My first cell phone was almost a briefcase that I carried around. Then it turned into this big old massive Motorola phone. Then all of a sudden, you had PCs, and then you had iPads, and so you have to adapt to the technology. You can't just say, "Well, I'm an old fart, and I'm going to do it the old way." So what I've had to do as both a coach and an investor, especially like, for example, in the area of marketing. When I headed up the marketing for my company, we had two telemarketing rooms that we did the majority of our appointment setting, and then we had boots on the ground sales reps out there that would go to
Mm,
restaurants, hotels, and country clubs, typically based off the appointments that they got from our telemarketing rooms. Then we also augmented that with mass mailings of postcards. We would send out thousands of postcards every month. And then the marketing got a little bit more involved as we moved into other states
mm,
because we had to support offices in those different markets as well. And then with the advent of emails, we were, I think, pretty early on, we realized the potential of email because we felt like
mm.
emails does the same thing as the postcards we were sending out. Now, we didn't stop sending out the postcards, just like Carl teaches us, you don't stop writing letters necessarily just because there's technology out there. But we adopted using email blasts as on social media, fairly maybe not so much social media, but certainly email. And that brought us in a lot of business, right? And it was
Hmm.
cheap and inexpensive, right? So we could email blast 100 restaurants in a market, and let them know like 2 weeks free cleaning, with a yearly contract. So, we could, change the subject lines. And then when I sold the real estate business and obviously sold my cleaning company, I had retired for about a year. And then when I decided to unretire, based on like Facebook ads that I got from Chris and Carl, as well as
Hmm.
my investment banker pushing me to go on the buy side of M&A. So hence I formed my independent sponsor private equity group. I started to realize that I had to adopt more and more, at least understanding of, digital marketing, for example. And now, obviously, AI is big, and I'm far from an expert in either of those, but I'm also trying to learn as much as I can, and certainly parlay off of others that have created, AI technology, such as, Chris with his AI suite, and my partner Jamie Busby in several marketing and coaching businesses that we're in. He's created some AI tools and so on and so
Hmm.
forth. So I think the high level, Peter, is that you have to be open to change. I don't care whether it's technology or what, you have to be open to change. And if you're not, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. No, I appreciate walking us through all some of the major changes throughout your time.
Sure.
Um, some people think AI is kind of like the dot-com bubble. It's getting so much hype right now, and everyone's talking about it. Do you view it in that lens, or do you think has potential to be even more disruptive?
Yeah, well, like people have talked negative about the dot com, uh, whatever you want to call it, fall, but I don't view it that way. I mean, the dot com bubble, I think there was every reason for there to be a bubble, right? Because, how many dot coms are there now? How many billions of dot coms are there? So I think there's too much money behind AI and too many smart people behind AI to think that it's going to be something that is going to, just fade out. Now, I think there's certain industries where AI is going to have trouble with, unless robots take over. But to clean a restaurant, they actually have robots now cleaning big box stores. That come in at night, and just go up and down the aisles and scrub the floors. But I still don't think it's going to, put janitorial companies out of business. I don't think it's going to put plumbers out of business. I think there's going to be plenty of industries that are going to thrive. They'll be able to use AI in their business, but not necessarily replace it. So yeah, I don't think, I think AI is here to stay. I hope it's controlled because we don't want another Terminator. But yeah, I think, it's just like what we were talking about before. You got to be open to the change and embrace it as much as you can. A year ago, I never went on ChatGPT, and I'm on it every day now,
Yeah.
right? Even asking the stupidest questions. Like I've been intermittent fasting and I put cinnamon in my black coffee, right? And I was like, am I cheating? So I asked the robot this morning, can I put regular ground cinnamon in my black coffee? And does it still count towards me fasting till 11 in the morning? And the robot said, yeah, it's fine. There's hardly any calories. Um, so
That's good.
yeah, I mean, but yeah, so you have to adapt with the changes. And I could have said, "Well, I'm 64. I'm never going to use AI," right? But then again, I wouldn't have known about the cinnamon in my coffee. So yeah, I think you got to adapt with change. You got to adapt the change, and you don't have to be an expert in it. And gave a very powerful speech about it in Atlanta, right? There's going to be cycles of AI. Um, and would I invest my entire net worth in an AI business? Probably not. But there's going to be cycles, there'll be fallouts, but
Mhm.
that's not a bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. No, great, Lenny. It's you mentioned you could have retired or you did retire. I'm curious what got you back out into the playing field. What motivates you today?
Yeah, my wife wanted me to retire after the apartment communities because they were a lot rougher than we thought they would be. We were really hoping it was going to be smooth, and it wasn't. And obviously, the cleaning business, we were, 25 years. So I was a little burnt out, and I had turned 60, and she was wanting me to retire. And the deal we agreed upon was I would take a year and pretty much do very little. I still had real estate holdings like I still do now. But other than that, it was to, wake up on a Monday and not really have anything on your to-do list, so to speak. And after a year, she looked at me and she said, "You're not cut out for retirement. You're going bonkers." I work from the home, but she gave me you need to get out of the house and do something. So I didn't have to go back to work, thank God. But I guess M&A people, we're all alike. Or at least a lot of us are alike, especially successful ones. It's not even about the money. It's about the challenge. And, I felt like my brain was going to mush. And I always
Mm,
love learning. And, the first thing I did, well, the first two things I did, they were almost simultaneously, is I bought Carl's 10-day course. And that course was like, I was blown away because back in those days it was $199 and it was very, very detailed. And I was
mm,
loving it. Like I was like, I couldn't wait to like jump into another module. And then I took the CEO course and I learned even more. So then I said to myself, well, I'm starting this, independent sponsor private equity group, and then I'm learning all about M&A from Carl, and I started going to a lot of private equity conferences. I think I can learn a new business, which is the M&A business, right? And I'm still learning to this day, because it's only been about 3 years. So I
mm.
still, almost tune into almost every Zoom. If I can't do it live, I listen to the recording. Carl and I are personal friends, so he still teaches me things. And I'm always learning and going to private equity conferences. I'm going to one in a month. And I learn from those conferences for bigger deals, big girl deals, big boy deals, and then learn a ton from Carl and Chris on more Main Street deals. So I love it. Keeps my brain going. And now there's studies out there that show that you have a better chance to ward off things like dementia and Alzheimer's if you're doing stuff
Yeah.
every day and you're learning. You're creating new pathways in your brain. So yeah, I love that stuff. Love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you actually have more fun when you're using your brain and interacting with people. There's
Yes.
a lot of sad studies, unfortunately, about people retiring, um, and
Hmm.
di living a short retirement life because they, you know, die young and they're just not adapted to the retirement lifestyle.
Yeah, they're not engaged. Your brain's a muscle. It needs to be engaged or it atrophies. Um, Now, will I want to pull back down the road? And the things I'm trying to do now are less day to day, more high level. That's why I'm on a bunch of boards and I'm an advisor to several companies and, invest in companies because, I can hopefully impart some of the wisdom I've learned through a lot of dumb tax, as I mentioned in the beginning, as well as, also be able to enjoy, things like my grandkids and my wife and my kids and that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Um, but I think you could do both. I'm going on a 24-day vacation starting at the end of March, and I'll have to do some work. Um, you know, Fortunately, the world is wired now, or Wi-Fi'd, and you got a laptop and you can be anywhere and take a meeting. So that's the cool part of the world these days. And certainly after COVID, it's more acceptable for you, to take a meeting on a cruise or in Italy or
Mm.
wherever it is that you want to go. So yeah, I'm loving it, man.
Yeah. Well, great conversation today, Lenny. Appreciate all your insights. Something last question I ask guests is if you could give one piece of advice to a struggling small business owner, what would it be?
Well, that's an easy one. Don't give up. Don't give up because you only fail when you give up. So you might have to pivot. You might have to make changes. You might have to bring people on like I did. I was thinking of giving up before I brought my partners on. We didn't get into that, but because I was burned out, I had little kids, I had infants. I was up at night with them. I was up at night when my pager was going off 24/7 in the 90s. So we started cleaning restaurants, third shift, crews not showing up. But if you don't give up, you don't lose. So absolutely, just don't give up, and keep fighting, and make good decisions, or try to make good decisions, or rectify bad decisions. But you only fail when you give up. So that would be my final advice.
Wow. Good way to end it. Yeah, and where can listeners find you? Lenny, was the easiest place?
Yeah, so my website is www.emccapitalgroup.com. That's with two C's, EMCCAPITAL group.com. My email is lenny@emccapitalgroup.com. Uh, Again, always happy to help people. I think my motto, Peter, is I try to help first, right? And then if an investment opportunity comes or a coaching opportunity comes, that's great. But I think if you help first, to a degree, I've learned to say no a little bit too, because I can't just keep helping everybody, for perpetuity. But always happy to help initially. And I think if you do that, and people really believe that you're doing it for the right reasons, then it turns into things that can be really cool down the road. And that's how I've gotten most of my clients, and that's where I've made most of my investments, is just by helping first. So yeah, and I want to thank you for having me on this, because I love to do this kind of thing, because this is one of my ways of helping and letting people know that you don't have to have a daddy with a trust fund that gives you $2 million to start your business. You could have $100 and you got to wash windows during the day so that you could pay for your night cleaners, and you have a moped because your dad took your car away because you were a hot mess up in Tallahassee. So you don't have to start. You can be a very successful business if you don't give up and you work really hard. And you don't have to. You won't. You don't necessarily have to define being successful because you have all this money to start. You can bootstrap it on the way up. So I'm glad I was able to share some of my experiences, and I'm grateful for it. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Loved having you, Lenny. Thank you. I'll be
Of
in touch.
course. Yes. Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate it. Bye bye.